Liberalism arose in Europe in the context of long-standing and bloody religious conflicts, and the desire by some to put such conflicts to an end. Hence, the primary challenge of the original liberals was to find a way to govern society that would not provoke religious conflicts. In practice, the liberal solution was to have a government that treated every individual equally and remained neutral in religious conflicts. To do so, the government needed to maintain distance from not only religion but also everyday life, culture, and philosophical debates, because these things were also heavily tied to religion back then. Hence, for practical purposes, a liberal society is one where the government maintains some distance from everyday society, culture, and philosophy, and generally remains neutral towards cultural and philosophical conflicts. This model of society arose out of a specific need in Western history and later came to foster the pluralism that became a hallmark of Western society. The history of the development of liberal governance is hence also the history of how the West became pluralistic and intellectually free. Wokeism, more accurately called cultural systemism, threatens the consensus that liberalism built in fundamental ways. Cultural systemists believe that society's culture and institutions are all parts of overarching and interlocking systems of oppression, designed to oppress women and minorities for the benefit of the privileged groups. As liberals, we oppose cultural systemism because it would effectively end the liberal model of Western society by attacking both the position of neutrality in culture and philosophy and also the separation of governance from culture and philosophy. Given that as liberals we oppose cultural systemism as part of our work of upholding the liberal society, our opposition to cultural systemism must also be done in a way that is consistent with upholding the liberal model of society. This means we need to separate the political sphere from the cultural and philosophical sphere at the very minimum. In the political sphere, our only commitment should be individual liberty. Therefore, in terms of politics, our opposition to woke activism should be restricted to the grounds of individual liberty, and equal treatment regardless of immutable characteristics. The wider philosophical views of cultural systemism, including everything from gender is a social construct to marriage is patriarchal and repressive, are not part of the proper scope of politics from a liberal point of view. This doesn't mean we can't speak out in opposition to these ideas. However, all this belongs in the realm of philosophical debate, which the liberal model of society says should be seen as separate and kept at a distance from the politics of government. If we still believe that government should be culturally neutral, then we shouldn't be waging cultural and philosophical battles in the arena of politics and muddying the waters between the cultural and the political. The authoritarian rights model is essentially using state power to stamp out wokeism in its entirety, without discriminating between the spheres of government politics and cultural philosophy. To do so, it would necessarily have to extend state interference into culture and philosophy, right down to the level of everyday life. The authoritarian rights anti-woke war extends state power into local libraries, schools, main streets, and even families. There is no limit to state intrusion into everyday life, and no right to privacy, as long as action is taken in the name of defeating wokeism. This is reminiscent of the pre-liberal religious conflicts in Europe, where states often attempted to mercilessly wipe out rival religions within their borders, using every ounce of state power at their disposal. In the face of the rise of wokeism, we have two different responses. The liberal method is to defend liberty in a neutral way in the political arena and to combat cultural systemism in the philosophical arena. The authoritarian right method is to fight a cultural war against wokeism using state power, extending state power to every area of life in the process. The two methods represent two very different visions of what society should look like. The liberal model that ended Europe's religious conflicts versus the pre-liberal model that led to those conflicts. The liberal model that made the West pluralistic and free versus the pre-liberal model where everyone obeyed kings and lords and the state church on everything. The thinkers of the post-liberal right are openly disdainful of the liberal model of society and wish to put an end to it. They are already envisioning how an illiberal future for the West could look like. Those of us who support the liberal model should see this attempt to take us back to the Middle Ages for what it is, and stand firmly against it. even as we continue to combat cultural systemism too.